Now that we spoke about the basics of automation, let's look at what are the different types of triggers that can initiate automations. In Zorp, there are 4 types of triggers. Okay. Number 1 is what we call workflow level events. Okay. So that can be accessed by clicking here on workflow events, and you'll have certain default automation, but you can always create new automations. Okay. So let's talk about what are the different workflow triggers. Okay. Let's create a new one. You go to trigger, there are different kinds of trigger that are actually available. So one is when, we'll start from the beginning, on task create. When you create a task either from the dashboard or the user creates a task from their phone, you can run an automation. That means upon the new task creation, you can actually initiate an automation and it can actually run. That is the first trigger. The second one is when this task is updated, you want to run an automation. So it could be that when the task gets created, I want to create an entry into my internal DB. So that is an automation that you can actually do. When the task updated, I want to send a push notification to the user every time the task gets updated from the backend, or through either by manually or through APIs. When the update happens, I want to notify the user. So that's a second type of trigger. The third one is when the task gets deleted. You might want to send some push notifications or some SMS to the user saying that the task has been deleted and removed from their account. So that's where on task delete trigger actually comes in. Now, the other ones are user or team assignment. So Zorp task can be moved from one user to another, obviously based on permissions. Now, when the task is assigned to one person, that is what we call task assignment. And when the assignment happens, you might want to send a push notification saying that, hey, a new task has been assigned to you. So that is even a default automation. So upon the task assignment, perform this action, which is a push notification. So the default action is task assigned, and we send this notification to the user every single time automatically. You can also change this information and hit save to save this. So this is completely accessible to you. Now, apart from these triggers, we also have an ability to send an automation when the task is unassigned from a specific team or a specific user, so that they know that the task is no longer part of their app. And the final one is when the scheduled timestamp of the task is actually changed. Almost all the tasks have a certain schedule time, and if you want to change that, when you update that, you can send some automations. You can send push notifications, or you can call an API. You can do even reassignment to a different user when this happens. So all of those things are actually possible. Now, this is the first type of automation, which is workflow events. The second type of automation is what we call transition events. So you click on any of these transitions, you have the ability to create a transition automation. And in the transition automation, the trigger is always the same, that the user clicks on the button, the CTA at the end of the screen. So that's what triggers this transition automation. And you have the normal validations, conditions, and actions apply. So we'll talk about, we already spoke about this in the previous video. Please have a look at this if you have not. And we'll talk about specific actions in the future. Now, the third type of automation is what we call an OnLoad automation. So when, let's say, any of these screens are opened in the user's phone, we can trigger an automation. So the user doesn't have to do anything. As long as the screen loads, we will trigger an automation. So where can this be used? Imagine that this is a an inventory checklist or inventory audit you are actually doing, and there is a drop down which has a list of my list of inventory items. Okay. Now let's say this list needs to be populated from your ERP, for example. So how would you populate it? The only way is during task creation one way is to do during task creation. You call your ERP, get all the information, store it in Zorp and use it. That is one way of doing this. But probably, why do you need to create two separate copies? What you can use there is OnLoad automation. That is, when the screen loads, you can call the API. The trigger is same. You can call the API to fetch the data from your ERP and add another action to update the component that you actually have. So that's one way of doing this, and those are the scenarios where you use OnLoad automation. So this is automation type number 3. The last type, which we have already seen, is what we call a component level automation. So you click on any component. When this component is updated, you can actually initiate an automation. So again, very simple, create, add a trigger. And the trigger is you choose a component that you want to use. So if the name of the component is not very clear, all you have to do is just go back, change this to video component, and I can create an automation, and the trigger I can use as radio. And say on value change is basically whenever the value of that particular component changes, the trigger actually gets initiated. So you can save and I can move on to the next set of things. So these are the 4 types of validation we have seen. Just to summarize, number 1 is system level events, which is workflow events. We have assignment, unassignment, deletion, updation, creation, schedule slot, update, all of these things. That is number 1. Number 2 is transition level automations. Number 3 is when the screen loads, you can create an OnLoad automation. You can access it when you are at a screen level config. And number 4 is component level automations, which runs every time a component gets updated. So those are the different types of triggers that are available in Zorp for you to run automations.